Okay, welcome everyone to the Myasthenia Gravis Association virtual monthly meetup. We are so glad that you're here. If you are new to the Myasthenia Gravis Association, we invite you to check out our website, www.mgakc.org, or our social media channels to learn more about the work we are doing and what we have going on. I'm Sarah Bolton, and I'm your virtual host. I am joined by a familiar face, McKenna Fulton, as well as a new face, Catherine Clemens, with the MGA. They will be monitoring the back end of tonight's session and helping to record the program. Following the presentation, you will receive a survey, and we hope that you'll share your feedback with us. We highly value it. We are excited to share that in March, Konstantin Pharmakidis of the University of Kansas Health System will join us to share about new treatments and implications for care in 2024. There will be a link to sign up in the email following the session today. Now I will turn it over to JB Smalley and our friends at Immunovant for their program on clinical trials. Over to you, JB.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's wonderful to be here this evening. I'll take my next slide, please. So we are so grateful for the opportunity to be here. We very much appreciate our collaboration with the MGA. They are a community that guides our daily work. We also appreciate all the different patient advocates affiliated with the MGA who have shared their stories and provided their insights. And it's through learning about your experiences that you guide our daily work, and we are very appreciative for everything that you do to support our efforts to truly develop innovative approaches for myasthenia gravis. So next slide, please. So for those of you who are not familiar with Immunovant, we're a clinical stage company, and we're dedicated to enabling normal lives for people with autoimmune diseases. We're developing targeted therapies that are designed to address the complex and variable needs of people living with autoimmune disease. So our AIM program stands for Advocacy in Motion, and this is a skill building program designed for US-based patient advocacy organizations. This is really a program that is informed by all of you. You will have an opportunity to fill out a survey, and when we get your insights, we use them to plan programs that are most meaningful to organizations like the MGA and the patient community that they serve. So this program is being shared with you tonight with special thanks to both the MGA and CISCRP. We're very grateful to the work that MGA does to support the patient community who has myasthenia gravis, providing education, support, and advocacy. We're also grateful for the partnership of CISCRP. CISCRP stands for the Center for Information and the Study of Clinical Research Participation. They are the leading nonprofit organization that really strives to educate patients, professionals, and the public about clinical research. We are so grateful to have them here working with us, given their role in the community as a trusted source in educating the public about clinical research education. So we have 3 objectives for this program today. The first is to review the various types of clinical research. The second is to understand the benefits and risks of clinical trial participation. And then finally, number 3 is to learn how to better navigate the clinical trial process. We are very lucky today to have a wonderful speaker and expert on clinical research, Bridget Chapatel. Bridget is representing CISCRP, and she serves as one of their advisory board members. She is a clinical research professional with over 2 decades of experience in the biomedical research industry. And she's also the founder of an organization called Hypothesis Haven Science Club. It's a medical science program for children that provides early exposure to careers in life science. So I want to welcome Bridget and pass it over to her to get things started today. Welcome, Bridget.
Thanks so much, JB. I'm excited to be having this conversation with you all today. I hear so many questions about clinical research just in the course of, kind of my day-to-day professional life and about clinical trial participation. And one of my really favorite things to do is to really kind of talk with groups like yours, and just to kind of let you know a little bit more about the process, because I really believe that information is so important. So I'm hoping that today I can help shed some light on the questions that you may have as well. So we can go ahead and get started. All right, so first, let's just kind of start at the ground level with the basics. So there are many different types of clinical research, and it's important for people who may be thinking about participating in research to really understand the differences that there are. So in the simplest form, clinical research is basically the study of health and illness in people. So if you've ever taken a medicine or you've gotten a vaccine, then you've already benefited from clinical trials. So trials often try to answer specific health questions, some of which are exploring the cause of a disease. Others may look at how behaviors impact a person's health. And then some look at new treatments to see if they have any effect or if they could work better than an already existing treatment, or if a new treatment is safe for people to use. So these are the clinical trials that most people are familiar with. And these are ones that are actually testing what are called investigational agents, because those are treatments that haven't yet been approved by the FDA. And so there are two primary categories of research, observational and interventional. And so the main difference is that in observational studies, just very much what it sounds like, researchers are just observing. So they're not experimenting, they're not testing. On the other hand, in interventional studies, researchers are actually looking at new ways to prevent or treat a disease. So going back to observational studies, investigators may assess health outcomes in a group of people they will assess health outcomes in a group of people or participants according to a research plan or a protocol. But in an observational study, even though participants may receive an intervention or procedure as part of their routine medical care, they won't be assigned to group A or group B by the investigator of the clinical trial. So for example, an investigator may want to observe a group of older adults to learn more about the effects of different lifestyles on cardiac health, and they'll just watch that group of people over a certain amount of time. But for interventional studies, those are the type of research study where participants are actually assigned to a group to receive one or more interventions or treatments, or even sometimes no intervention. And that's done so that researchers can actually evaluate the effects of the interventions on biomedical or health-related outcomes. So these assignments, whichever group that the participants are going to be assigned to, are predetermined by a study's protocol or research plan. And within an interventional study, a participant may receive a diagnostic, a therapeutic, or any other type of intervention. And so within the observational and interventional categories of research, there are actually various types of studies that kind of fall under that umbrella. And so a few of them are listed here. So for example, treatment trials test new treatments or new combinations of treatments, or even new approaches to procedures. Prevention trials are just looking at better ways to prevent disease in people. And those could be people who have never had a disease before, or people that have had the disease and we're looking at ways to prevent that disease from returning. Diagnostic trials find better tests or procedures for actually diagnosing a particular health condition or a disease. And screening trials test the best way to detect certain diseases or health conditions. And quality of life trials basically explore ways to improve comfort and quality of the life of individuals who may be living with a chronic illness. So depending on what is known and what isn't, researchers may even study the same research question using different types of study methods within different groups of people. And so as we go along, I kind of want you to just keep in mind if you have any questions or things that you'd like. We will have a question and answer session at the end of this talk. So go ahead and just start putting them in the chat now, and then we'll kind of address those as we come to them. All right, so how do clinical trials for a new treatment work? So many of you are probably most familiar with the treatment trials that I just spoke about. So the ones that are testing new treatments or new approaches to treatment. But there are many steps within those trials. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time just kind of going through that process. So first, let's just touch on the journey of developing a new therapy and the importance of clinical trials, okay? So clinical trials are a critical part of scientific advancement and introducing new therapies for people who are impacted by disease. They are very carefully designed, they're carefully reviewed and carefully completed, and they need to be approved by a health regulatory agency such as the FDA before they're even allowed to start. And so clinical trials are broken up into parts, which are called phases. So phase one of a clinical research trial tests an investigational medication in a small group of usually healthy people. So we're talking anywhere from about 20 to 80 people. And then basically the point of a phase one study is just to judge the safety and side effects and to also find the correct dosage of a medication. So in some cases, people who are living with a specific disease may be included in part one in phase one, but typically it's usually healthy volunteers. So for phase two studies, we're talking about more people. So usually, 100 to 300 people. Phase two studies continue to look at safety and looking at things like short-term side effects, but then they're also starting to look at very preliminary data on whether or not the investigational medication actually works in people who have a certain disease or a condition. And so phase three involved even more people. So we're talking about anywhere from several hundred to a few thousand, depending on the type of disease and how common it is. So these studies are just gathering more information about safety and how well the medication may work. So if successful, at that point, health regulatory agencies like FDA will review the safety and efficacy data of a medication after phase three. And then once they have approved the medication and made it available to the public, a really great thing is that, the research doesn't just stop there. It actually goes into what's known as phase four of research, which is when researchers just kind of continue to track and monitor how well the therapy is working in the real world. And in that way, they're able to kind of gather long-term effects of the treatment. And so the process that I just went over is the traditional drug development process, but it's also important to note that these steps could differ slightly for some medications, including genetic medicines or in the treatment of cancer. But the process that we've just gone over is the standard process for developing a medication in the clinical trials process. So one of the things that I wanted to point out is just how important volunteers are in the clinical research process. It just can't be overstated because it's important to note that if we didn't have volunteers, we wouldn't be able to do any of this research at all. I do have to point out that not every treatment ends up working the way that research is intended. But without volunteers to take part, we just would never be able to have new and better medications. So you just really want to, really, point that out and really thank anybody who has volunteered for research in the past or is considering it in the future. And so I guess one of the big questions that, is really common is just, why participate in clinical research at all? And so we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I did want to go into more detail and, just let you know of some reasons why you may consider, participating in research. So there are several reasons, a few of which are listed here. And one of the big ones that people cite is just really wanting to contribute to the advancement of our knowledge about health and disease. There are some studies that are designed for or that include people who are healthy, but want to find ways to prevent a disease. Maybe it's one that's common in their family and they want to, take part in helping to find a cure. But then there are just other people who just want to contribute to the advancement of our medical knowledge. As part of a clinical research trial, participants will typically receive very specialized care. And so it's a bit like visiting your regular doctor, except you will receive more attention. The office visits are more frequent and they tend to be more comprehensive than just a typical visit with your regular doctor. And so, that may be, what some people consider a benefit because you're getting, to interact with specialists more and then also more frequent than you normally would for your condition. And then also, another big reason that a lot of people would consider participating in a research trial is that you're gaining access to potential new treatments. Sometimes there are people who are in a condition where all of the approved treatments that are available for a condition, may not be working anymore. Or they may be unable to tolerate the side effects from approved medications. And so in this case, clinical trials provide, an alternative option, when standard therapy is really not providing that optimal relief that the person is seeking. And so, as we talk about some of the potential, benefits or the potential upsides for participating in research, it's also very important to acknowledge that there are risks or considerations that come with participating in a clinical trial. And some of these, quite honestly, this is an investigational treatment. So that means it may not work, or you may be assigned to, or you may not be assigned to the investigational treatment as part of the study. Instead, you may receive a placebo or something that's known as a sugar pill that does not have the investigational medication in it. It's quite common to experience side effects in a trial, just as you would with, any other treatment. And sometimes those side effects could be serious. And then also participating in a clinical trial can be time consuming. As we mentioned, you're seeing a specialist more frequently than you would your normal doctor. And so this could have an impact on your work or your personal life. And then sometimes if you participate in one clinical trial, it could prevent you from being able to participate in future trials. And so these are just a few of the risks, but there are definitely others. And these are all things that you should definitely discuss with your healthcare team and your study team if you're considering being part of a clinical trial. And so in terms of diverse representation in clinical trials, this is something that is also really important. And it's because clinical trials can only tell researchers how something works in the people who take part in that trial. And that seems kind of like an obvious thing to say, but really, treatments sometimes can behave differently from one population to another. And if a clinical trial does not involve enough participants from diverse backgrounds, there really is no way for scientists to know how or even if that treatment works for everybody who it needs them and who is actually going to eventually end up taking that medication once it becomes approved for use in the general public. So clinical trials, unfortunately, often do not include groups of participants that are as diverse as the full population of patients, as I mentioned, who will actually be using that drug once it is approved to use in the real world. For example, people who are white are often represented more than people from other racial and ethnic backgrounds, including people who are Asian, Black, or African American, Hispanic or Latino, or Native American. And in the United States, race and ethnicity is a proxy or a stand-in for many other non-health related factors that actually end up having an impact in health. So that's why it's important to have people from all of these diverse backgrounds in research. But even beyond race and ethnicity, factors like age, gender, or even whether or not a person lives in a city versus a rural area can impact the health options that are available for them. So this is why it's important to intentionally design research trials that are inclusive of people from all of these groups. So diverse trials help doctors learn which treatments are appropriate for patients within different communities. And this can help pave the way for better healthcare options for people from all communities. Okay, so now that we have a better sense of how the process works and potential benefits and risks of participating, what next? So I'm going to speak a little bit more about the protections that are in place for people who join clinical trials, because this is also, kind of another big topic and a big thing that people have questions about. So a little bit of a history lesson. So the Belmont Principles are the basic ethical principles that have been identified by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Research Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. They were written in 1974, and these principles have actually been codified into federal human participant protection regulations in the United States. And so the principles are listed here on your screen, and we're going to go into them a little bit more. So the first one is respect for persons, and this basically demands that people who enter research do so voluntarily and with enough information. Beneficence just notes that researchers have an obligation to minimize any possible harm and maximize possible benefits for patients in research. So I know a lot of us have heard when it comes to, physicians, they have an oath to, first do no harm. But in research, in addition to minimizing harm, researchers also have to maximize any possible benefits. You can't do research just to kind of see what's going to happen. You actually have to have a belief that is supported by, prior research that shows that there is going to be some kind of benefit from this research, or there's a possibility of benefit from this research, rather. And so the principle of justice is the need to scrutinize whether some classes of people, so thinking economically disadvantaged, racial and ethnic minorities, or persons who are confined in institutions, are systematically selected as research subjects due to their position or vulnerability rather than their connection to the problem being researched. So the concept of justice is just making sure that, we're not taking a sample of convenience rather, but we're actually looking at people who have a connection to the disease that, you're trying to improve. So on the flip side of that, the principle of justice also demands, taking a close look at whether certain classes of people who are considered compromised or vulnerable are not being excluded from participation in clinical trials due to financial and other barriers, even though they have a connection to the problem being considered. A lot of times, certain populations, investigators are people too, and may feel as though, well, I don't know if this person is going to be able to, stay in the study all the way through. Do I necessarily want them to be a part of the study? And so the principle of justice just, is in place to make sure that, when we're thinking about the people who are part of research, that we make sure that we're giving everybody a fair shot at being a part of a trial who could benefit from it, and that we're also making sure that the people who have a connection to the disease have a chance to be a part of the research. So if you want to take part in a clinical trial, you're going to be asked to review and sign an informed consent. And so to give consent to participate, it's not just signing your name on the dotted line. You actually have to clearly understand the information about the trial, such as its purpose, how long it is, and all of the possible risks and benefits from participating, and then also what's going to happen to you during the trial. So we're talking about things like what you're going to be asked to do in the trial, when you're going to be asked to do them, any of the tests and procedures that will be done, and also how your personal data will be used. Because, in this information age, that's really important as well. And so a lot of times, this can seem overwhelming. And so you may be wondering, well, what happens if they explain it to me and I don't understand? Well, it is the responsibility of the study doctors and the nurses to share all of this information with you, and also to give you the time, to review it, process it, ask questions, get your questions answered, maybe take it home if you want to, look over the paperwork, so that you can really get a good understanding of what is going to be asked of you as part of the trial. And so if you have someone who legally makes your health decisions for you, this person can provide consent on your behalf. But this typically happens if a person is too young, say a minor under the age of 18, or if it's somebody who's too sick, or for some other reason can't fully understand information about the clinical trial, and has that person who's designated to make those decisions for you. And so again, I just wanted to, stop and state that it's extremely important to realize that even after giving your consent to be in a trial, participating in a clinical trial is voluntary. So that means even if you started, you decided that you wanted to be a part, but at any time and for any reason, you can say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore and I want to stop the trial. And it's the responsibility of the study staff to help you to do that safely. So in terms of, what to know before you participate in a research trial, there are many things that people may be thinking about and that want to ask about prior to signing that informed consent. And we're going to go into some of those. The decision to participate in clinical trial is very personal, and it's one that should always be made in consultation with your healthcare team and with, trusted individuals. As I mentioned, it is important to discuss potential benefits and risks before joining a trial, but making an informed decision actually goes further than just that. There are a lot of topics that you would want to proactively discuss with your healthcare team, including better understanding just how the particular trial itself will work. So in terms of your research trial, you want to find out, what's the main purpose of this trial? Is it to treat my disease? Is it just to manage my disease? Is it to treat just the symptoms of the disease? Like, these are the sorts of things that you'll want to find out about the research trial. Will you be receiving the investigational treatment? So the treatment that we're studying to see, if it works and how well it works, or will you be receiving a placebo? How will the treatment be given to you? Will it be a pill or an injection? I know some people have a fear of needles. So if it's going to be given by injection, that may be something that you'd want to consider before taking part of the trial. Certain people may have issues swallowing. So depending on, the number of pills or the size of the pills, that may be kind of a make or break factor for you wanting to be in a particular trial. So you always want to find out, how is the treatment going to be given? And then also, how long will you receive the treatment? That's also something that's really important to find out from your research team. So in terms of participation requirements, you'll want to find out, how long will the trial last? Is it going to last 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years? That's something that you'll have to take and factor into your personal, maybe your professional life. And that could be, a deal breaker depending on, whether or not you'd be able to make those study visits. Also, do you have to pay anything to be a part of the study? Are there reimbursements for trial expenses? At times there could be, required travel if the trial site is outside of your typical area. Or you may be at appointments all day and, maybe you'll have to have lunch. Sometimes there are trials that cover that as well. Also, another question to think about is whether or not you'll be able to see your own doctor while you're a part of the trial. And it's very important, as we've covered, to understand the full experience that you'll be taking part of as part of the trial. You'll want to definitely find out what's already known about the safety and efficacy of the therapy. Even though this trial may be taking place in humans for the first time, there's always going to be background data that's been done in the lab, some of the background data that's been done on animals. So you can ask your study doctor about all of these things and how they think that the drug how they expect the drug to work in patients. You'll also really want to find out if you're going to have to stop your current treatment. I mean, if you're on immunosuppressants that have been working really well to, you know, to really work well on your condition, what does it mean if you have to stop that to go onto the trial? I mean, that is a very common thing that happens. You know, we don't want the effect of the study drug to maybe be masked or to be muddled by any other drug. So a lot of times you might have to stop the current treatment that you're on. And then also you'll want to find out, you know, what tests and treatments will you have to undergo? Is it X-rays, CT scans? Is blood going to be drawn? You know, there are lots of different things that go into being a part of a trial, and these are all the sorts of things that you will want to make sure that you understand. And of course, the clinical trial staff will explain them to you, but you want to feel free to ask any of these detailed questions, and maybe even have a list of questions before you go in so that you're ready to get all of those answered. And also a big thing to think about is not only what happens before and during the trial, but also what happens when the trial ends. You know, we talked about how participating in research is voluntary, but, you know, you do want to find out, well, what happens if I decide to stop participating? And really from the standpoint of, will I be required to, you know, check in with the study doctor, you know, maybe for a certain period of time afterwards, just so they can make sure that I'm still doing okay? You know, will I have to come into the clinic for those visits? So even though you've stopped taking part in the study, there still are safety protocols that are followed just to make sure that you're doing okay after that. And you'll want to know what those are. Will you be able to return to your current treatment? You know, sometimes you can, and sometimes that may not be an option for you anymore after taking part in a trial. And so you'll want to know that going in. If the treatment works, can you keep using it even after the study is over? And also, will you receive any follow-up care? And if so, what kind? Now, we've touched on a few of the common questions that come up during the evaluation process of research, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into a few of those. I think one of the biggest questions that people have is, what if I get into the placebo arm of a clinical trial and I don't receive any treatment? And while that is definitely, you know, a very kind of understandable question that people have, what I wanted to share is that if you agree to participate in a clinical trial, you know, while you may receive the trial treatment or you may receive a placebo, more commonly than receiving a placebo is just receiving the approved medication for that treatment if one is already available. And so while you don't get to choose which group of the study or arm of the study, as it's called, that you'll be assigned to, whether it's going to be the investigational treatment or the placebo, and actually, you may not even know if you've received the placebo most of the time until the trial's over, because they really try to make sure that if it's an injection or if it's a pill, that both of them look pretty identical so that people won't really know and kind of bias the results of the study by knowing, oh, no, I've got the placebo, or no, I've got the investigational treatment. What I want you to know is that if your condition actually does need treatment, rather than a sugar pill with nothing in it, you will receive the standard medical treatment in addition to the placebo. And so that's if you don't get into the investigational arm, the placebo would also include the standard treatment for a condition if a treatment is needed. All clinical trials are reviewed and approved by ethical boards, which are called institutional review boards. And there's no way that an IRB is going to approve a clinical trial that says that participants that have a standard medical treatment that is already available for them would only receive a sugar pill with no treatment. So that's a really common question that we get in this field. And I just really kind of wanted to make that clear. And we can go into that more in the question and answer session if that's necessary as well. And so another common question that we get is, what if my condition starts to get worse during the trial? And, you know, sometimes that does happen. But it's important to know that your health is very closely monitored while you're part of a research trial. And if there is a change in your medical condition while you're on a trial, first of all, the trial staff is going to discuss that with you when you come in for your next visit. And they may recommend that you leave the clinical trial. Or they may recommend that you receive a different treatment. So, you're definitely going to be monitored closely, and options will be made available to you if that's necessary. So another question is, if the research trial ends, will I still have access to the treatment? And so there are several different considerations to address before the end of a clinical trial. And having conversations with the study doctor, who's called the PI, the clinical research staff, kind of can help to give you more information about this. So these include how your medical care is going to be transitioned, who will be your primary care doctor moving forward, if you'll have access to the study drug after the study. And if you'll have access to your medical records, and whether or not your primary care doctor can access the records as well. And then also one of the things that is important is, once you invested all this time taking part in this trial, you may want to find out, at the end, what was the outcome of the trial? Did it help people in the way that scientists thought that it would? And then also if there are any other upcoming trials that you could be a part of after this one ends. So study sponsors are not necessarily bound to continue providing access to a treatment once a trial ends. But when you're having these conversations during the informed consent process, it's good just to check, because all of this should be stated within the consent form. And then, of course, if you're not sure, you can always have that conversation with your study doctor or the research site staff. And so in some cases, with phase 2 or 3 studies, studies may include what's called an extension. And basically what this means is that at the end of the main part of the study, so where the study would typically end, if it's been found that people have received a benefit from taking an investigational medication, sometimes researchers are allowed to continue that study for a certain amount of time. So they're extending the length of the study for additional time. And that just gives researchers an opportunity to study long-term use and gather additional information about the safety and efficacy, or how well the study works. And if that becomes available, an extension becomes available, that will be discussed with you by your study team, and you can decide whether or not to be a part of that. And so pharmaceutical companies and drug sponsors also may have programs to assist families with the extra cost of medication after a study ends. But that just depends on whether or not the medication is already approved for public use. But it's important to note that there are other programs and tools available to assist with medication access. And for investigational products that have not yet been approved, there are certain mechanisms where pharmaceutical companies may be able to continue providing the investigational agent once the study has ended, to those people that really need it. And so, it's also important to know that just because you've taken part in one trial and it's ended, there may still be other clinical trials out there that may be of interest to you, or that, may be helpful for your condition. So, once a trial ends, you may want to look for, or you could talk with your study staff about what other clinical trial options, there are that they might recommend that could be a benefit to you as well. Another question that comes up is how much it costs to participate in research, and also whether insurance will cover it or not. And so what I will say is that this is one of those questions where it can be kind of case by case. So you really do want to contact your insurance company to talk with them. However, in general, most of the costs of a clinical trial are typically covered by the sponsor of the trial, meaning you will not have to pay for the costs that are specific to that clinical trial. Again, the informed consent will explain these possible costs, payments you may receive, and also any expenses that will be covered. So things like taxi, Uber, gas mileage, hotels, if that's necessary. These are all things that, have been and could be covered in the clinical trial that you're taking part in. And But there could also be costs for the care you receive in a trial. And some of these can be covered by your health insurance. If there are costs that are not covered by insurance, those will be explained in the informed consent. So you want to make sure to read that section. It is not necessary to have health insurance to participate in a clinical trial. But if you don't have insurance, you want to make sure that you talk to the study staff and let them know so they can talk to you about different payment options. Now, some clinical trial sponsors do have programs in place to pay for care that would normally be covered by insurance. But if you have insurance, coverage works pretty much the same way as it does with your usual healthcare. So you may have copays and deductibles that you would still be responsible for taking care of. Insurance plans will only cover care in trials that are approved by an institutional review board. So that part is really important. And most insurers cannot refuse to let you join an approved clinical trial. And they also can't limit your benefits because you're participating in a trial. So as I mentioned, it really just is important to kind of contact your health insurance provider ahead of time. And just get an idea of what trial costs they will cover. So you can tell them the name of the trial and where it's taking place, and they will be able to kind of assist you in finding out what things will and will not be covered and what your responsibility, your financial responsibility will be as part of that. If your insurance plan does not have out-of-network coverage, it's important to note that the trial care must be in network to be covered. But again, some of these things can be on a case by case, so you really want to make sure that you're talking with your insurance carrier and finding all that information out. All right, so we're coming up to our last topic, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. And so I often get asked, where people can go to find out about clinical research opportunities. So there are a number of resources to keep people informed about clinical trial opportunities that might be right for you. So it's always helpful, of course, to speak with your doctor about different treatment options for your medical care. Doctors who take part in clinical trials can give their patients access to new treatment options or what are considered off-label uses of medication. So different uses for medication than what they are currently or mainly used for. So people can begin their search for a clinical trial by talking with your healthcare provider. So your physician, nurse practitioner, your nurse, because these are typically people that you feel more comfortable with, you already have a relationship with. So that's a really good place to start. But going on from there, you also have the option of looking for volunteer health organizations. So such as the Myasthenia Gravis Association. And these health organizations are great because they provide specialized information about a particular condition. They can give you information about clinical trial opportunities. And they also have a lot of patient advocacy efforts and also national and local chapters, hospital connections and community groups where you can really kind of get in there and get connected and find out about the research options that are available. And I know that if you look at Myasthenia Gravis Association's website, they actually have a resources tab where you can find out about clinical trial opportunities as well. There's also the options of registries or networks. And registries typically focus on a specific disease or condition or a procedure or a medical device. And so once you sign up to be part of a registry, it's just an organized system that uses the observational study methods that we talked about just to collect data about a population that has a particular disease. And some of the registry examples are like the autoimmune registry, autoimmune research network, cancer genetics, Alzheimer's prevention registry, et cetera. And so another option is clinicaltrials.gov. And this is a web-based resource. So you can just go online, clinicaltrials.gov. And it is a government website, but they've actually made changes in the last couple of months to make it a bit more user-friendly of an interface. And anybody, so family members, patients, healthcare professionals, researchers can go on there and search for any clinical trial that's taking place. You can search by disease, indication, location. You can search by many factors, and it just really is just as easy as going to the website, typing in your information. And this site is maintained by the National Library of Medicine, so it's a government website, and the National Institutes of Health. It's a government website, and the really cool thing about it is once you type in and look for studies, you can actually have the contact information, so email, phone number of the research staff at a particular site, and really kind of get in contact with the people who are running the trial and find out more about if it would be a good fit or a good match for you. And so at this point, we have time for a couple of questions, if we have some. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator and answer a couple of questions.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Mike asked, are incarcerated people considered by researchers as potential subjects, or are there reasons for not using them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if you remember, we kind of touched on a little bit about the justice component of the Belmont report. So incarcerated people or people who are in prison are considered a vulnerable population. And what that means is that they just need an extra level of protection to make sure that their participation in research is actually for a valid reason. Unfortunately, in the past, there's been a history of unethical research that took place on either prisoners or, people that were confined to, mental institutions. And so because of that, now the Belmont principles have proactively put in place safeguards for those people. So typically on those ethical review boards that we mentioned, the IRBs, if there's a study coming up where for whatever reason, the research question has something to do with the actual jail setting itself, then they have what's called a prisoner advocate, who is a member of the IRB, but isn't necessarily there all the time, but is just brought in on special circumstances where a study involves incarcerated people. And that person's job is to really make sure that the interests of those participants are being protected. So yeah, that's a really great question. And there are safeguards put in place to make sure that, you're not just using them out of convenience. This is, maybe to study the spread of XYZ disease in, the jail population. And they definitely have protections in place to make sure that their rights are being protected.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Next question is, what typically is the youngest age a child can approve or deny participation that parents otherwise want? Babies obviously can't decide, only the parents can. So is there a
Right.
specific age?
So yeah, so this is kind of a two-parter. So the first thing I'll say is that typically children under the age of 18 cannot give consent to take part in research. They can give what is called assent, which is just saying, yes, I do want to be a part of this study, or no, I don't. But if they're under the age of 18, it would typically be at least one parent who would have to sign the consent form. Depending on the severity of the disease, you may need two parents to actually sign saying that a child can take part in it. And so I have worked in oncology research, which I would say is kind of like the highest level of research because we're talking about life or death. So that does require two parents to sign. If there is a situation in which a minor, really does not want to be a part of the study. I actually don't even think I've seen a situation like that firsthand, but I've definitely heard about it. It really kind of depends on several factors. I mean, nothing is ever black and white. You would have to have conversations with the research team, study doctor, family, patient, in order to kind of really reach a situation in which, if a child really didn't want to participate in the research, do the doctors feel like it's ethically advisable to go forward with the treatment. And so it really kind of is more of a nuanced conversation more than a black and white one. It's definitely something where the researchers would not just overlook the wishes of the patient, because they are there to treat the patient in favor of what an outside person, even if it's a parent, would want to do. So I guess there's no short answer, but I guess the long answer is that it would be a really kind of involved and detailed conversation among all the parties that are involved.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can drop them in the Q&A or the chat.
Sarah, we had one other that came in and it's marked as resolved, so I just want to raise it to
Okay, great.
And the question had to do with the five types of research. This person wanted to understand an example of a screening trial. So maybe you could give a few examples of what a screening trial looks like.
Sure. And let me see, I'm just going back to the slide with the 5 types of research here. Sure. So in terms of a screening trial, so like we mentioned, so the 5 types, just kind of as recap, were treatment trials, prevention trials, diagnostic, screening, and quality of life. So a screening trial may be, for example, if we're looking at, and screening and diagnostic, kind of go hand in hand. Screening is just, the disease may or may not be there, whereas diagnostic is, we know that there's a disease and we're just trying to figure out what disease it is. So for example, if we, breast cancer, for example, are we testing certain ways of doing an at-home, breast self-exam? Is that a good way? Like maybe, there are certain methods to the way you do it. Are you, moving your hand this way, up and down? Are you moving it vertically? Are you moving it horizontally, rather? And so in screening trials, it could also look at, equipment. So if we're coming into the doctor's office, is an ultrasound, of the breast a better way to screen for breast cancer? Or is it a mammogram? I know one of the things that has kind of come up fairly recently, probably in the last few years or so, is that they're noticing women with, let's say, denser breast tissue, that, a 3D mammogram is better than a traditional 2D ultrasound at just, screening and looking through the breast tissue to make sure you don't miss something. So these are not necessarily diagnosing somebody with breast cancer, but they're just testing better ways to actually just try to screen and make sure that people don't have an illness.
Thanks so much. Let's see. I think you did cover the question about if a subject benefits from the drug, can a sponsor continue providing the drug for free to the subject? So,
Mhm.
um, anyone else? Last call? Oh, Mike says, I think I might know why I was the only one to ask questions.
Well, I think if we just have a few more minutes, maybe we can just go to our last couple of slides and close out.
Sure. So at that point, I'll hand it over to JB to kind of take us through the end of this session. Thank you for your time and attention. It's been really great sharing this information with everybody.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for such an informative session. And just a reminder that, your participation matters, and hopefully you feel after attending this session that you're better equipped to explore these opportunities to participate in clinical research and come to your own decisions if it's the right opportunity for you. So I'll take my next slide. So I know Sarah had mentioned that there'll be a email follow-up for this, and there'll be a survey in it. Another resource that we have for you is a summary of everything that you learned here today. And so that will also be coming with the email, and you can use that as a reminder. You can even print it off and use it to take to your doctor's office, but that will be coming to you as well. And then the next slide, I think I mentioned before that most of these AIM programs, the topics are really informed by you all. And so in order for me to keep this program alive and running, your feedback is so important. So there will be a link in the email, but there's also a QR code here if you happen to have your phone and you just want to quickly take the survey. It's a 3-minute survey, and we're really interested in learning what we could do to improve these programs, if they were effective for you. And then we also want you to tell us about other topics that would be of interest to you. So I thank you all so much for attending today's AIM program. I want to give a special thanks to Bridget and the staff at the MGA for hosting today. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful evening. Thank you.